Okay, great. So again, welcome everyone to the December session of the Transmedia Art Seminar, co-sponsored by the Mahindra Humanities Center and Meta Lab, both at Harvard University. My name is Hannah Borden, and I am a professor of theater and performance studies at Barnard College and Columbia University, and I co-chair the Transmedia Art Seminar with my colleague, Professor Magda Romanska, who shares the same field and is based at Emerson College. So before I welcome today's speakers, let me note how you can participate in the discussion that Magda and I will moderate after the talk. So during or after the talk, you are welcome to submit your questions or provocations via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you would prefer to interact via voice and image, that's possible as well. So in terms of your participation, please take into account that we are recording the webinar. It will be posted on the Mahindra Humanities website and available for public viewing. Having said that, let me assure you that by joining us today, you are under no obligation to appear in the recording. If you would like to participate anonymously, you can do so by using an alias and turning off your video. So we will hear your voice, but we will not see your face or know your name. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest speakers, AGNIESZKA JELEWSKA and MICHAL KRAWCZAK, who are joining us from Poland, from the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, where they both teach in the Department of Anthropology and Cultural Studies and have co-founded the Humanities/Art/Technology Research Center. Currently, Professor Jelewska serves as the center's director and Professor KRAWCZAK as its program director. Professor Jelewska's work examines the social and political dimensions of the relations between science, art, culture, and technology in the 20th and 21st centuries. She's the author and editor of a number of books and texts appearing in both Polish and English, among them Ecotopias, Expansion of Technoculture, Sensorium, Essays on Art and Technology, and Art and Technology in Poland, from Cybercommunism to the Culture of Makers. Professor KRAWCZAK's work focuses on media and performance art, the ecology of sound, social robotics, artificial intelligence, and technological natures. He's the author and editor of many publications in Polish and English, of which I will mention the two most recent, The Icon, Essays on the Art of Marina Abramovich, and Post-Technological Experiences, Art, Science, Culture. Collaborating on scholarly projects, our guests also collaborate in the realm of art. For instance, they have worked together on experimental trance opera, Anesthesia, and the interactive installation, Post-Apocalypsis, and on the art and science project, Transnature is Here. Agnieszka and Michal, we are very excited about your participation. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for introducing us. And thank you, Magda, for inviting us. And yes, of course, we regret that we cannot be in Boston now and be able to share our ideas and discuss live with all of you, our concepts and what we today would like to present you. But the situation is as it is, and we can't do more than be on Zoom. I hope that despite of this Zooming style, we still can share this important, actually for us, concepts and this important part of our research. We are really, really thankful to all of you to the fact that you decided to join us today. And we are, of course, delighted that we can be a part of the seminars that are held at the Mahindra Center. And today's topic will be spectral storytelling, social engagement through technology in traumatized environments.
Yes, thank you for inviting us. The HIT Center was established in 2011. Since then, we have realized many art and science projects, among others, interactive installations, interactive storytelling environments, prototypes of experimental operas, narration based on artificial intelligence, media interventions in urban spaces. We also curated some media art exhibitions and led many courses and workshops for artists, scientists, designers, and activists. And of course, for all these years, we are working as researchers, doing research and teaching all the time at the university. So fields of our research and practice are environmental and cultural studies, technoculture, art and science practice. And what does it mean? It means that we are academics and researchers, curators and practitioners in the field of art and science. And of course, we are using experimental methods like transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary modes of solving problems, and critical making, critical design, which is quite important for us, and creation as research. And today's seminar, we will only talk about part of the center's activity. So we will discuss the example of two of our projects, one completed, the other being in advanced research phase. The first case study focuses on the cultural and biopolitical consequences of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant catastrophe in 1986. The second concerns the violent and necropolitical genesis of a small lake located within the city of Poznań, where we both live, which was founded by Jewish prisoners as a form of artificial nature between 1941 and 1943 during the Nazi occupation.
Yes, and analyzing this two-case study, we would like today refer to the environments affected by structural violence and anthropopressure, resulting in environmental harm and even trauma, and experimental media as possible tools that enable us to work in such environments, the importance of storytelling, and whether critical speculative design can be a useful method for narrative planning, human and non-human relationships in an anthropopressured environments, and spectrocartography as our research method of studying data spectrum gathered from research in the archives and in the field.
So the first case study is Chernobyl. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster of 1986 was one of the far-reaching and long-term traumas inflicted on Europe, having great significance for global energy policy and also influencing biopolitical, cultural, and affective transformations related not only to the threat of an atomic explosion, but also to creating a resilient society, as Beckett and Giddens, social scientists, called it.
And in their opinion, the Chernobyl plant explosion changed the definition of society, of course, Western society, we must add, in a permanent way by introducing a concept of modern Western society based on resilience strategies and risk generation. A resilient society is based on the definition that indicates that the risk of subsequent disasters has been permanently inscribed in the structural, legal, political, and cultural conditions. In this structural inscription, we recognize long-term environmental harm, and it results from anthropopressure. In this respect, however, anthropopression also becomes a biopolitical, very important force.
The environmental impact of the Chernobyl explosion was and is still spectral in nature. We started our research in 2013. The data we have collected since then has included archival data, political texts and speeches, scientific reports from 1986, mainly Polish, Belarusian, German, and Finnish, on the impact of radiation on the environment, the decay process of particles and their impact on organisms, genetic changes potentially caused by radiation, which led to increased incidence of thyroid cancer in the areas affected by radioactive fallout, the processes shaping political geographical phenomena, and the private narratives and materiality of post-memory.
We also done our research on the internet, finding lots of materials related to dark tourism, visual images of the catastrophe, and photos taken by users. For example, contemporary images of Pripyat, as well as auto documentaries. What struck us was the fact that for both scientists and cultural users, the catastrophe is not over yet. It continues. It continues because the decay of the elements contained in the radioactive cloud traveling across Europe has not ended. As a result, it is impossible to establish unequivocal results of long-term research. And this applies both to research conducted in the exact sciences, hard sciences, and in the cultural field. So the catastrophe also persists and endures in the emotions and affects that still accompany this topic.
During the whole process of spectrocartographic research, we decided to juxtapose these findings with our own autoethnographical research. In this case, the basic effect that emerged after interviewing people who remember those days was discrepancy between the fact disclosed by the authorities of the then communist regime in Poland and USSR, and the common experience of that time and post-memory.
Another findings, which is not so maybe strange, but was the importance of non-human agency of the situation of 1986. So the first of all, it was radioactive particles, which are and still which were and still are very powerful. So the most common turned out to be cesium-137, a radioactive element whose half-life is more than 30 years and which can persist in the ecosystem for between 180 and 300 years. One of many examples of spectral interconnectedness between human and non-human, which we encountered, is that of wild boars. In 1986, the authorities in Poland prohibited the consumption of fresh plants and drinking cow's milk. This was part of an attempt to stop the direct penetration of cesium into the human body. But years later, it turned out that the radioactive element is found in completely different places and bodies to what was expected. In 2013, we came across research conducted in Germany between 1998 and 2008, which revealed that presence of cesium-137 had been found in wild boars. This is due to the fact that mushrooms are a staple of their diet, and mushrooms accumulate radioactive material for a long time. These studies have been carried out because, among other reasons, wild boar meat has been consumed by part of European population, especially in such countries as Germany and Poland. These studies may shed light on a negative factor that was not taken into account in Poland in the first years after disaster. The Polish case differs from the German one, as access to meat was regulated in Poland until 1989. Its legal purchase was possible only by means of the so-called food stamps. As a result, the illegal meat market developed and the key product was game. This and other studies conducted in different places in Europe and at different times indicate that impossibility of formulating an ambiguous research thesis and closing the case called Chernobyl.
Cesium-137 not only became one of the agencies of the Chernobyl catastrophe, but it also an appearance of the hyperobject, as Timothy Morton called it, which is bigger than just the disaster. It shows the real interconnectedness between the human and non-human, but also non-locality and the possible tunnels of time through which hyperobject can operate. It must be remembered, however, that this catastrophe was triggered by anthropoppression activity and was distributed as information through biopolitical procedures in which some had access to information and others were deprived of data. In 2015, we prepared an interactive installation called Post-Apocalypsis for Prague Quadriennial of Performance Design and Space. The whole process of designing the installation took us almost 2 years and was tightly combined with our research on the spectrality of catastrophe. The group that worked on this project later formed the Dead Bytes Collective, which operates to this day. Apart from the data we have already gathered during the process of designing this piece, we had 2 images which became the direct inspirations.
Yes, the first inspiration was the image of the red forest. After the Chernobyl disaster, 4 square kilometers of pine forest immediately behind the reactor's wind turned red-brown and died, thus becoming the red forest. This was one of the visual codes present during the entire process of designing plant facilities in the form of broken trees. The second inspiration was the unique photographs taken by Igor Kostin in the zone of Chernobyl during the time of radiation activity, show the cloud of radioactive dust coming from the nuclear power plant. On an analog photographic plate, the photographer captured the state of the power plant after the explosion and the work of people securing the site of the catastrophe. But in these pictures, radiation was also captured. Due to the high level of radiation, some of the photographs did not come out at all. The frames of the photographic film were all black and some had specific pictorial qualities. A very large grainy image or white smudge. The smudge in Kostin's photographs seem to come from a different visual order. They are spectra of different space-time reality. These 2 images, in fact, became not only a visual setup for the final installation, but also organized a deep structural level for interaction, user experience, and very specific method of sound projection as a spectral affect.
So here is a short clip.
This song are worthy of God, of nature. This is translate labor in the name of nature. mighty song, a creator song. This song
Participants entered a very bright white space filled with light, with the broken trees in the center. The first level of hearing was based on dynamic sound, which surrounded everyone in the room. The loud sound was a musical structure based on the process of sonifying weather data, including temperature, wind speed and direction, air humidity, atmospheric pressure. Participants could choose a location where data was collected from on interactive screens. The locations were connected with nuclear accidents, catastrophes, or test sites such as Chernobyl, Fukushima, Los Alamos, and others. The data stream from the chosen location was sonified in real time into a granular multi-channel composition. The experience of sound with which participants could have depended on the data and could be very dynamic at the one moment. A pleasant white spectrum like soft white noise, or became suddenly very loud and glitchy. In fact, sometimes the sound could have been very painful for human perception. In these audible conditions, we designed the second level of hearing, which was an uncanny somatic experience of bone conductor interfaces placed on the trees. After putting their head to the interfaces, participants start hearing voices, not through their ears, but inside the head, while still hearing the messy weather soundscape from the outside.
Through bone conductor interfaces, the participants could hear fragments of Polish Romantic poetry. The texts were read by a female lector with aphasia, making them very difficult to understand, as you could hear in the clip. These fragments referred to, these were actually fragments from Polish Romantic poetry. And they referred to idea of nature, interconnectivity between the human and non-human, and human absolute relations. It is crucial here to refer to the fact that for Polish national autobiographical history, Romantic literature has ghostly meaning. It is always present in our history, unfortunately, I must say, especially today, has been constantly used by different political forces to rebuild and sustain Polish nationalistic feeling and social conditions, and even sometimes, as today, a messianic vision of our nation with regard to other European countries. What we wanted that time to do was to extract this old text from the nationalistic level of metaphors and symbols and show the ecological potential of thinking that started in the period of Romanticism. The texts were read, like I said, by the female with aphasia, and that's why they were really, really difficult to fully understand. The atomic level realized by granular structure or of sonified data, together with the somatic hearing of these old voices, produced the uncanny and weird atmosphere of the work. The participants were in a place which was at the same time a non-place due to the possible data from different places. It was hybrid, spectral, it was revealed in the constant changes of the localization brought about by the participants themselves.
By bringing together in the art and science work, romantic texts about nature, which directly identify nature with transcendence and metaphysics, the radioactive cloud, along with the problems of cesium decay radiation present in mushrooms, wild boars, trees, and the global policy on nuclear energy, we try to reveal interferences, so spectra of interactions, affective but also biopolitical perspectives of perceiving these complex systems. It is certainly also a critique of the romantic perception of ghost in nature. It is a clash of immaterial and transcendent visions that to some extent culturally colonized nature with the tangible and measurable materiality of radioactive fallout, the mechanism of anthropopressure and biocommunication. These two orders of Western culture collide with each other. Romantic ghosting combined with traditional humanism and new materialistic spectrometric combined with contemporary post-humanist concepts.
The method that we used in the research process, which we have already mentioned at the beginning of our seminar, is spectrocartography. We called it spectrocartography. And now we would like to spend a moment presenting this process. So in our understanding, spectrocartography has several important contexts and references, both in humanities, social sciences, data sciences, and for us, it's mainly a method of studying spectra, sampling and comparing data from various areas. If you see and search for some context for spectrocartography, of course, you would go for spectra of Jacques Derrida, studies on long-term effects of traumas, cultural memory, private memory, Holocaust studies, critical research with media studies, with great work of Mark Fisher, for example. Spectrality as also alternative to reconceptualization of the frameworks of postmodernism, postcoloniality, materialism, nationalism, and globalization. When looking for inspiration in this sort of studies, we also approach them critically. Spectrum is an opportunity for us to group the collected data into the structures of overlapping bands of the spectrum, not ghostly affects or hauntological state. So using digital tools and sensors, we are trying to blur opposition between living and dead, subject and ghost, and give voice to different participants of the environments, meaning to introduce, which is so important for us when we use technology, to introduce non-human actants to the middle of spectral stories, not to the borderlines or edging. That's why elements of spectrocartographies, as well as the space for reflection from which they were born, include also post-human studies and new materialistic theories. So return through technology to matter, material, and materiality, to word without words, or vegetal being, as Lucy Irigaray would say it. Friction from Anat Singh, agential realism, Karen Barat, sci-fi storytelling, matters of care, and also a very important part and field of research done in biocommunication, where we have this very important concepts of communication, non-verbal communication between plants, done by Professor Monica Galliano or Andreas Heinl. So spectrocartography as a research method is so important as a starting point for our research practice, is thinking about environments in terms of digital physical space, code space, but including all those non-human actors or actants, and the measuring apparatus itself, which is treated as a tool that provides data for analysis, as well as a tool whose cultural functioning should be always subjected to critical reflection. So data used for the analysis is always situated. The spectrocartographic method is also a process of continually and consciously situating both raw and analyzed data in revealed and undisclosed relationship to each other in a specific geographical and digital reference. We describe the method of obtaining data as sampling.
So what is spectrocartographic sampling? This always depends on both the research problem posed and the environment we are studying. The data obtained from individual studies became samples, and we call the steps of the entire process sampling. All the obtained samples are then used for spectral analysis. Finally, a spectrocartographic description is created on the basis of sample analysis. Thus, spectrocartography is open and even calls for further counter-analysis. Spectrocartographic description may also take the form of open diagrams, charts revealing the relationship between the specters themselves. This method is not always geared to obtain unambitious answers, but rather to revealing the interference of specters from different sources and indicating their possible socio-cultural consequences. Spectrocartographic practices can be used both to produce academic texts and create artifacts at the interference of art and science. So now I would like to talk about the second case study, the long-term harm in the small environment of Elsensee-Rusałka, which is very strange and very important for our local community nowadays. Rusałka is a small water reservoir currently located in the center of the city of Poznań. It serves the residents as a place for recreation, sports, jogging, walking, and sunbathing. But Rusałka is also one of the many examples of Nazi Germany's geopolitical modernization project of landscaping as procedure of race expansion. Therefore, in the spectra we study, the displaced past merges with the constructed modernity.
In the case of Elsensee-Rusałka environment, we take into account a modernist landscape design with a particular Nazi approach to the concept of artificial natures, Nazi concept of ecology and green, necropolitics as spectropolitics, memory and environmental harm, urban design and the use of artificial natures in the city center, and neoliberal politics of place as subordinated to recreation and pseudo-ecology. To illustrate the situation in which the Jews were digging the lake, I would like to use the quotation from the text of one of the researchers of documents from that time, Wojciech Meixner. The start of the quotation. When the work began in the spring of 1941, the Jewish population in Poznań was too small for the task. Hence, the Jews were deported from ghettos from other Polish towns and also from abroad, from Austria, Czechoslovakia, Luxembourg, and Germany. In total, approximately 11,000 people, men and women, were resettled to Poznań in this way. They were imprisoned in 29 forced labor camps located within the boundaries of Poznań at that time. The Jews used to excavate two artificial lakes in the town, Elsensee, and the second one, which was not actually finished, Lake Malta. Jews had to dig out the basin of the lake standing in the clay pits. Matzevot, Jewish tombstones, from the liquidated by Nazi city cemeteries were used to strengthen the bottom and shores of the lake and other surrounding structures. The conditions prevailing at the sites of slave labor were horrific. Executions were the order of the day. The terrible hygienic condition, diseases, especially typhus, and the exhausting work combined with hunger meant that death was even ever present. Sorry. The forced labor camps in Poznań were liquidated between August and October 1943. Prisoners who survived the horrors of the camps and the slave labor were transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. The end of the quotation.
So the artificial lake was an example of the geopolitical and racist expansion of the Eastern territories was developed and described by the Nazis in Generalplan Ost, which was about bringing humans, nature and race into harmony in order to establish a new agrarian way of life for Aryan colonists. In order to achieve this vision, the landscape had to be made anew. First, by forcibly removing the Slavic population, by bulldozing away past, and finally by moving Germans into the newly emptied space. A key element of this vision was also the concept of Lebensraum, a term that the geographer Friedrich Ratzel appropriated from 19th century ecological theory. It was also a component of the project to reurbanize and recultivate cities. It should be emphasized that the Nazi plan's Poznań was located in the center of the so-called Wartenland, an area which was to be an integral part of the Third Reich, inhabited exclusively by Germans. In the Nazi expansion project, Wartenland was to be a paradise for racist landscape planners who could easily implement and experiment with new forms of shaping urban, rural, and cultivated areas based on the ideologies of the German folk. Elsensee was to have served as a space for implementing the model of the ideal Aryan citizen, the cult of healthy lifestyle, involving contact with ideologized and designed nature, was to contribute to the rapid development of a strong and expansive society. In this regard, planning included not only urban relations between green and built-up areas, but also the ways that citizens were supposed to behave in these new spaces. Nature is no way free in such a conception. Designed green areas and suburban forests are in effect the same as the gardens of the time, which gave priority to selected biological species over others. The core of the project was oculocentrism, and the design ideas were subordinated to shaping an attractive landscape. In 1943, Lake Elsensee was completed, and in the post-war years, all its functions were preserved. And if the lake's origins had been forgotten, and its necrogenesis was successively displaced and gradually erased.
In 1974, the lake was named Rusałka. And from the perspective of Slavic mythology, when the origins of the lake are borne in mind, the name Rusałka is somewhat peculiar, since a Rusałka is a nymph who tempts and kills newcomers. This too seems very odd in the context that 3 memorial sites were located near the lake, commemorate over 2,000 people who were shot by Nazi just before the lake was founded in 1940. In the first decades after the Second World War, the recreational development project for Lake Rusałka was expanded. Beaches and sports centers building were completed. In the 60s and 80s, it was a period in which this place was extraordinarily popular. Later, due to the lack of investment, the recreational infrastructure went into decline. In the last 10 years, however, the lake area has been intensively developed, and not only have its recreational functions being restored, but the sports infrastructure has been expanded and the ecological education program has been developed. The walking route around the lake has been furnished with information boards, sign spots, And last year, even an observatory for watching waterfall appeared. And again, nothing happened about the foundation history of the lake.
In 2018, a local ecological microcatastrophe occurred. Due to extremely high temperatures in the summer period, the water level in the lake decreased significantly, while the water temperature increased, and there was significantly less oxygen. As a result, the mussels inhabiting the bottom of the lake died out. At the same time, as a result of water level falling, Matsevot unexpectedly came into view. These Jewish tombstones had been used by the Nazis to strengthen the bottom and shoreline of the lake. This strange conjunction of ecological catastrophe with the dark history of the extermination of Jewish prisoners led to a complex situation in which this place became a topic that was described and discussed very emotionally in local and national media. Residents for some time could no longer use the lake. It had become biologically contaminated, full of the rotting shells of mussels, and at the same time, due to the exposed shoreline, presenting a visible reminder of the pressed Nazi crime. For several months, the lake became a social issue that divided the inhabitants of Poznań. Some wanted to regain their place of recreation at all costs, while others took partisan actions to recover the tombstones from the bottom of the lake as soon as possible. This very drastic and perhaps outrageous juxtaposition of dying mussels with the slavery and genocide inflicted on the Jewish population is, and this has to be stressed, not our invention, but a fact that emerged in the space of the lake and in the collective consciousness of the inhabitants in the summer of 2018.
While working with our spectrocartographic method and conducting the sampling process during workshops with artists, students, researchers, and activists in 2018 and 2019, we try to make also counter-cartographic analysis and introduce non-human actants. Hence, the collection of data from various areas of Rusałka environment was added to the project. That's why we created, for example, speculative taxonomies of beings emerging in space, a critique of the traditional cultural biological order based on taxonomy of species being, referring mostly to the text of the molecular biologist Andreas Heinel. Methods of analyzing digital maps with particular emphasis on what information related to memory, post-memory, functionality, recreation has been marked by users on various types of maps and digital platforms. We did analysis of information on the Rusałka area appearing in social media and archive materials concerning the creation and development of the lake area.
We also took into account official acoustic maps of city of Poznań, which document the sources and paths of noise propagation in the immediate vicinity of Rusałka, comparing them with the methods and measuring apparatus used in soundwalks and field recordings. And we also used sound interfaces to listen to the electromagnetic landscape. Field recordings were made with the use of various techniques, from point recordings to ambisonic recordings. We also supplemented the maps with methods of analyzing affective experience. Workshop participants filled in questionnaires which assessed their affective state at particular points in space by marking places of special importance and associated with certain problems.
We also gathered materials that we recorded during field research, random shots of people's behavior at the Rusałka. Among many of them, you can find this specific recording from 2019 done on November 11th, Polish Independence Day. when we recorded together with workshop participants a ritual performed by winter swimming pools over Rusałka, singing of Polish national anthem. So the very juxtaposition of the necropolitical genesis of the lake with the nationalistic rituals practiced creates complex interfaces and interferences of spectra, conflicting forces in the environment. But at the same time, it strongly refers to the long duration of violence in the environment, which, as history is repressed, is constantly reconstituting itself. So after collecting this very different and very sometimes difficult for us historical and current data, we move on to the critical design phase and of system of social interaction based on spectral cartographic research and storytelling.
So the digital environment of Elsensee-Rusałka will consist of archives on the creation and post-war history of the lake, its management methods, transformations, current scientific data on water and air quality, meteorological data, pollution, environmental quality monitoring, and current noise level. The system will also include data from the natural sciences on species found in the vicinity of the lake. Access to the Rusałka archive will be possible from two levels. Remote access from a computer, example from a web browser, will enable navigation of all the collected materials and data as a browsable catalog. And the second one, access from a mobile device. But in this case, the user will have to be in a certain physical space, the surroundings of the Lake Rusałka, and he will have to use geolocation. In this direct access mode, the user will have access to many experimental forms of narration and interaction mechanisms. Use will be made of geolocation techniques, augmented reality, and haptic interfaces. Part of the narration will be created by artificial intelligence mechanisms. The whole system will not only be a platform for interaction with the complicated and complex history of space and its transformation as told from the perspective of human and non-human subjects, but it also serves as a tool for a public consultation. And now we are working on this project with the researchers from our university, with artists and designers, city activists. The technological partner of this project is Poznań Supercomputing and Networking Center. And the public consultation program will be curated by Malta Foundation, which is one of the biggest non-governmental art institutions in Poland.
So I hope next time we will meet, we can share with you the whole project and its actually embodiment in this environment of Elsensee-Rusałka. So if we would like to summarize what we try to discuss today, we can have some final points to maybe discuss with you. So a harm and trauma resulting from an anthropopressure activity, both as an ecological disaster and violence and terror against other human and non-human, becomes geologically a part of the environment, and they have an open or hidden impact of subsequent generations, the next human and non-human living in the environment. Environments, human and non-human entanglement affected by violence, have a complex structure and requires open methodology. For us, as we were trying to present, could be spectrocartography as one of the possible methods. Harm and trauma often reveals itself in unexpected events and unexpected times and in human, non-human relationship. Such environments constitute ready-made stories. It is necessary to focus on finding media that allow the environment to have agency, to design possible forms of generating verbal and, above all, non-verbal spectral storytelling. Multimedia, multi-structure, intermediate storytelling in a social engaging mechanism, recipients must independently find themselves in multi-layered structures, independently establish relationships with various subjects of the stories. An important element of social engagement in building, of course, groups, teams of people as a part of workshops, internships, seminars, so they can further lead and develop social debates on the topics covered. Methods of using technology, meditation, and interaction should have an experimental component. Each environment problems requires separate strategies, critical design within environment. Thank you so much for spending with us time, 1 hour actually, and that we could share with you our concept and issue on which we are still working in the case of Elsensee-Rusałka, and which we partially done in the case of Chernobyl research.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka and Michał. That was great. So we're going to open it now to some questions, and I want to encourage people to use a Q&A feature or to ask questions in the chat room. Or if you prefer to do it in person, you can just let us know and we, give you capacity to speak up. This is a very interesting presentation, as the US culture in the last few years has been struggling to commemorate its own places of trauma and to excavate its own history that has not been previously visible. And so the methodology, transmedia methodology, the multifaceted multimedia methodology that you guys are speaking about is very interesting for that type of projects, which, as you mentioned, require multifaceted approach in order to provide a full view of the historical and geographic context of particular events. So this is very interesting, especially for those who are trying to work with different aspects of performance, theater, art, museum, commemoration, and historical traumas and violence. So I'm happy to open it to questions, and let's start. Anybody wants to reach out and start out? We have it.
I could begin. I have a question about the installation, about post-apocalypsis work, and it's about the trees, or about the trunk of the trees. From where are they? How did you harness them for this installation?
Yes, they're from Poland, and we saved them actually just before they became floor. But the story with this installation is not finished because we were asked to present, because we won this golden medal. We were asked to present this installation in many places in Poland, and we did it actually. And then some museums were thinking about having like separately 4 or 3 or 1 tree in their collection. And we said no, of course, because it was not about actually trees, and the trees can't be a part of museum collection. And what we did actually, we destroyed the whole installation. Michal, maybe you can say, because you were part of this moment.
We destroyed it on the scrapyard, so now it's a kind of strange object which is smashed and combined from wood, metal, electronics, and we still have this very heavy block, and we are sometimes doing something, some exhibitions with it. But it was not important that the object of the installation, the most important for us was a situation and an atmospheric work, not just the trees. So that's the story of the materiality of this installation.
Yeah, I was asking the question because the tension that I perceive there is connected to whether the trees were, no, I will use the word, killed for the installation.
No, they were
saved them.
Yeah, they were saved actually. we just buy them from, people who were preparing them to be a floor in apartments. So no, we wouldn't do this, of course. Yeah, but I understand these questions. Yeah. No, definitely we didn't cut the trees in the forest.
Yeah.
So the Chernobyl case is quite interesting because the TV series came out recently, and it's been sort of, for those of us who actually lived through the experience, was difficult to watch, and I couldn't really bring myself to it, because the kind of Hollywood retelling of the story kind of jarred with my own experiences, being a child as well when this happened. And it's sort of interesting what you talk about, how potentially this type of storytelling can engage with major policy issues that have global consequences. So how did Chernobyl change the energy policies across the world in different countries, and how the narrative have changed, thinking about nuclear energy. and you know, whether it's good or bad, you know, it's hard to say, but engaging with that global conversation and trying to open it up might be partially a purpose of this type of projects, which attempt to use multimedia narratives and multimedia performance type of events in order to provide a multifaceted view of a particular traumatic event.
Yeah,
How did you guys engage with that?
Yes, thank you, Magda, because it's so important what you said. Because as we said in the presentation, Chernobyl hasn't been finished, and it's still the case. It's the case in global narration, global policies about nuclear plant, nuclear energy. In Poland, actually, as you know, of course, we have genetic fear against the atomic energy without actually discussion about this. Yeah, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that it's like trauma. It's something which we don't talk about at all. And so this is one problem. And the second, with this, it's interesting that you know, this HBO serial Chernobyl came out last year, I think, or 2 years ago. It's something in culture which is like we refer to resilient society or risk society. Is something that is going on with this feeling of catastrophe, of risk, or state of society in which has actually this risk and catastrophe inscribed in structural policies or structural behaviors or structural, actually on ontological level, I would even say that even if the catastrophe is not coming, we are still and constantly prepare for the catastrophes. Yeah. This is something which is, and of course, popular culture loves it. And these narrations are still so powerful that people can understand what happened in Chernobyl. Yes, wish you luck. But it's a part of the spectral stories, again, this kind of narrations.
Yeah, but when Fukushima happened, the accident in Fukushima happened in Poland, we observed that in all iodine solutions were sold out. So this fear is constantly showing in every time when something happened. During the Chernobyl accident, we didn't have any direct contact with the real data about the radiation. And after the Fukushima, it changed. For example, the public lab now is using the methods of community science. So we can use many DIY sensors to measure the real impact of catastrophes on the environment. So we do not have only obtained the data from the official laboratories. We can establish our own laboratories and collect our own independent data about the environmental issues.
The second project, the excavation of history and the excavation of hidden traumas, that's very interesting to think about as well. Let me see. We have one question over here. from Hashabaz. I was struck by the scene of the folk singing the national anthem in the lake. I was wondering if you could expand on that moment and speak to how the stories are drawn in and used by contemporary ethnopolitical and nationalistic registers, which you hinted at, beyond the capacity to hand and hold material stories. I was interested to find out when it was the lake that escaped the confines of locality to participate in a broader story, if at all.
Mm.
Thank you so much for this
Thank you,
question. This is a very good question.
Actually, we were thinking if it's a good idea to show this film, because you are right that maybe this part of the presentation needs context. Yes, we were with our participants of workshop, and we are actually wanted to gather some objects to do installations, something material from Rusałka, and we talked about these archives, historical trauma, and what we should do with this problem, how we should, I don't know, approach as participants, people from Poznań, Polish people, to the problem. Not to just place a memorial site, but do something, which can be important for citizens, let's say. And we saw these people coming into the water, singing. It was very aggressive, actually, very aggressive, as you can imagine, because they were cold and the water and they started to sing Polish national anthem. And actually, some of the participants of our workshop actually started to cry because they couldn't stand it. And that's the problem. The problem is, the
problem is who owns the
spectra.
spectrum.
Yeah, the spectra are so uncanny. And that's, if you know the story, it's so difficult to understand any of this kind of behavior. So I think it's also the best example of how the history, not excavated history, but the history which is hidden in the environment, is something which you constantly must work with, or you can't just say it's something happened here, but it's a constant work, constant practice, constant doing something. That's why we were thinking about using digital tools, DigiPlace, digital archives, open, very open, with many different data, which can actually give voice to this environment, to the actors of this environment. Yes, and Harsh also asked about the possibility to, I think, expand also this thinking from this local problem into something maybe different. Michal, maybe you can refer to this.
I also have very radical thinking about Rusałka Lake, in my opinion, it's already existing monument. It's a monument of Anthropocene, of Necrocene. I'm very worried about taking out the metabots from the lake, because I think that it will stop the discussion and everyone is going to forget about the history, and the lake will be owned by swimmers and bike riders and everyone who want to sunbath there on weekends. So this is a really problematic issue, how to deal with this kind of spaces where the necropolitic is a geological foundation. You cannot get rid of this. So, and this is a kind of broader problem, because Rusałka is a kind of typical place. This is not the unique place in Poland. If you try to find more, you will definitely find many other places which are based on the same politics and colonization foundations. And this is not only a case in Poland, but this is a case everywhere, I think, in Europe, and not only in Europe, because I think that Europe is quite safe place from this perspective. And a broader problem which we are trying to deal with is how to work on this kind of problems, not only with the Rusałka issue, but how to prepare a methodology, how to prepare procedures, how to prepare some kind of practical methodology and practical tools, and maybe even a digital systems to lead a discussion with local citizens and with politicians and with activists, because it can't be just done. It has to be a very spectral and very wide discussion, and it has to be over and over done again, because if we, for example, this is the case now in Poznań. If we will take out the metabots and we put there a monument, it will be the last thing that we can do for this history. And we only, we will still in the same modus of designing the this park spaces, this colonial spaces, this totalitarian spaces. So yes, I think that's my answer for this question.
Yeah, I mean, it is a complex spatial temporal problem. Yeah, to whom does the space belong, history or the present? Yeah, and this tension between the history and the present will, I think, inform a lot of the conversation and a lot of the polarization around spaces like that, spaces of mourning and spaces of trauma. Yeah. We have another question from Rafael. How do you think art can help to overcome this type of social traumas, in your opinion? What's the role of artists could be to work with it? How do the artists can potentially engage in developing perhaps methodologies of addressing spaces of trauma?
Michal,
Yes.
would you like to start?
We are working with artists all the time. So I think for us, it's very natural that thinking through art is an integrative way of dealing with problems, and artists had very unexpected way of perceiving things and problems, and also very good ideas how to engage in new strategies with public and with the society. So if you only try to blur some distance between science, art, and try to cooperate in a new way, I think it's the best possible perspective.
Right. Do we have any more questions or comments from the audience? Okay. Thank you so much, Agnieszka and Michał. We much appreciate this presentation, and hopefully we can, after the pandemic is over, we can invite you to Boston. And I'll let Hannah close our seminar today.
Yeah, and thank you, indeed. Thank you, Agnieszka and Michal, and thank you everyone for participating in the seminar. I have one announcement before we leave our screens. Our next session will be in February, 18 February, and Christina Brosner will be speaking about technology and transmedia dramaturgy in contemporary Japanese performing arts. So welcome back. In February. I would also like to thank Matt Battles, who is taking care of us throughout the session. And thank you, Matt. And I would also like to thank Magda for moderating the discussion. So thank you everyone once more, and hopefully we will see you, hear you, read you in February.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.